Hello. I know this is a bit weird, but bear with me. Now, during the Treaty of Versailles topic in your IGCSE course, you might remember that we looked at a typical Paper 1 question, which is divided into 3 distinct sections. The first one is a describe question worth 5 marks. The second asks you to explain something, usually by asking why, for 7 marks. And the third is an assess question, which is worth 8 marks. Now, it's possible to use the standard format to answer each part of a Paper 1 question. And we've already looked at how to do a describe and an explain type question. But Part C of a Paper 1 will ask you about something to which there are 2 sides of the argument. Often this is worded in terms of how far something might be, but could just as well say to what extent. Other versions of questions that are popular on IGCSE papers might say how successful, how accurate, etc., etc. The point about all of these questions is that they have a common core. They each want you to show both sides of an argument, evidence that agrees with whatever statement they've given you, and evidence that disagrees with the statement that they've presented you with. I guess the best way to understand this is by seeing an example. So let's take a look at June 2005, where there was a question C that said, how successful was the League of Nations in the 1920s? Explain your answer. So, how successful was the League of Nations? Well, I guess it could either be successful or unsuccessful. Can't be both, can it? Well, yes it can, and that's exactly what the IGCSE examiners want you to be able to demonstrate. The League of Nations in the 1920s was somewhere between success and failure. And so what you need to do in your answer is to show an awareness of that. Basically, you need to show evidence to support both sides of the argument. There's actually a really straightforward formula to be able to do this. In some ways, yes, it was successful, and in other ways, no, it wasn't successful. Those are basically your 2 paragraphs, but they don't completely answer the question. Once you've looked at both sides of the argument, you then need to draw your own conclusions. Overall, what do you think? How successful was the League of Nations in the 1920s? You should start by trying to find evidence to support each side of your argument. Take a few minutes now to try and identify some successes and some failures of the League of Nations in the 1920s. Pause this video and then come back to it once you've collected some evidence. The evidence that you have collected to support your argument is going to be central to your answer, but you need to use it properly. Remember to use P paragraphs, point, evidence and explanation to get your argument across in a clear way. You can't just talk vaguely about what the successes and failures are. You need to be precise, and you also need to show why they were a success or a failure. Your paragraph might begin with a point. In some ways the League of Nations was successful. For example, you could start with failures, it doesn't really matter which one you do. Then you need to support that with some evidence. For example. Then once you've included your evidence, your example, you then move on to your explanation, to explain why that meant that the League of Nations was a success or a failure. Remember that your explanation should include the word because. So now you've looked at both sides of the argument. In some ways the League of Nations was a success, and in other ways the League of Nations was not a success. In order to answer the question fully though, and to get the final mark, you need to reach a conclusion. This is your opinion. Your final paragraph could be as simple as saying, overall, I think the League of Nations was, however successful you think it was, because. Always make sure that you explain your points. And there you have it, a complete format for a Part C answer for Paper 1 questions. How successful? Look at the successes, look at the failures, and then draw a conclusion. Your next job is to go into the quiz below this and write your answer to this question in full using the format that I've just explained.